Hey everybody, Jeff Miller here from Target Test Prep. Welcome back to another session of YouTube Live with GMAT Club. I am the COO and head GMAT instructor here at Target Test Prep for those of you who don't know me or haven't been on one of these sessions before. Today's going to be a fun session. We're not teaching math or verbal per se. We are going to talk about how to get a great score in the GMAT. You can see here how to score 780 on the GMAT. Obviously, that's a great score. But a lot of what I'm going to discuss today are key points for anyone looking to get a successful GMAT score or really hit your target score. So even if 780 isn't your score goal, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is going to apply to you, because it's about starting from a certain level and then doing the things necessary to get yourself to a much, much higher level. Now, there's a lot of points I'm going to talk about regarding your study plan, how to approach the GMAT, how to approach your practice. So if you have questions as I'm going through these points, feel free to ask them. We will do a question answer session, of course, at the end, but I'm happy to answer questions that are relevant to the points that I'm talking about in the presentation. So don't feel shy of asking questions. I'll keep a look on the comment section to see if there are any. So we can get into it. Now, the first thing I want to talk about as it relates to getting a great score in the GMAT and getting a very high score in the GMAT is you do need to start with your foundations, right? Now, a lot of people, when they try to jump into their GMAT prep, one of the big mistakes I see is, okay, I'm just going to jump into a ton of different practice questions. If I do thousands and thousands of questions and read thousands of solutions, then I'll be able to improve my GMAT score, right? I mean, that's literally how a lot of people will take an approach at the test. And you've got to think about anything you learn at any time, right? You're always building from the ground up. They always say you walk first and run second. I mean, there's a million analogies I could use. And the GMAT is definitely no different. And a lot of us who are taking the GMAT haven't seen, math in the way it's presented on the GMAT in years. And for some of us, we haven't been presented with the type of verbal that's on the GMAT, maybe ever, or if in a long time. So you have to make sure that you're starting from the ground up. Now, what that means is that your GMAT prep may take longer than maybe you anticipated, because perhaps you're in a situation where you basically are thinking, well, hey, I could be done with this in 1 to 2 months, right? Well, usually it's going to take longer than that. And you can't let kind of the fear of how long your GMAT prep is going to take you to veer you off course and study in the improper way. So when we say build your foundations, well, when you're starting things like GMAT Quant, for example, you need to learn the basics of data sufficiency. That's a type of question that no one has seen until they get to the GMAT. You need to understand what the answer choices are, what's the difference between a yes, no question and a value question. You need to understand in a value question that if you need to get one distinct answer for the statements to be sufficient. You need to understand your fraction rules. How do you add fractions? How do you divide them? You need to understand your basics of exponents and square roots. Like, these are all incredibly important things that if you don't have these down and you dive into your GMAT prep without actually getting these foundations down, what you're going to see is that you take a couple steps forward and then a couple steps back. So rather than jumping in full steam into things that you're not necessarily ready to do, you want to start with those foundations. Now, the foundations is just one part of it, right? The next part is, well, how do you actually learn GMAT, Quant, and Verbal, right? Well, you need to make sure you also take a very topical focused approach to your studying, right? So on the same breath of what I mentioned earlier, just jumping into hundreds of practice questions, that's also not going to be helpful. You don't want to do a few geometry questions followed by a few ratio questions followed by some rates and work and think that you're just going to learn by doing reading solutions, because you're not. So the way that you want to look at your prep is say, okay, after learning the basics and developing the foundation, I'm going to start with, say, linear equations and algebra, right? And what you do in that situation is you learn and study all it is you need to from that topic, right? So you learn about difference of squares, you learn about two variable equations, you learn about three variable equations, you learn about factoring quadratics, foiling quadratics. You name it. And once you have all of that learned, or you feel as though you have it down in a pretty nice way, you move on to practicing it. And you don't just practice 10 to 15 questions, you practice, 50, 60, 100 questions. And that's how our course, Target Test Prep, is set up, where you're learning a topic in full and practicing it in, increments as you learn it. But then when you're done with that and you feel as though you have that foundation, you go ahead and you practice a ton from it. And then you kind of rinse and repeat with all of the quant and verbal topics that follow. It's the same process with verbal. You don't just dive into doing sentence correction questions. You need to learn the basics of grammar before getting into those, before worrying about comparisons or parallelism or idioms or subject-verb agreement. First, you need to know the basics. Again, same thing with critical reasoning. You need to understand how question stems are structured. What is a conclusion? How to locate it? What is a premise? Where can I find the assumption? And then once you know that stuff, you can get into more specifics like strengthen the conclusion or weaken the conclusion or resolve the paradox. So hopefully what you're seeing here is that you need to develop and build up. As I always say, if your foundation is built on mud, as you get higher and higher and higher in the process, you really have more and more to lose. And, in my 15 years of experience of teaching the GMAT, I've seen really disastrous experiences when students don't cultivate their foundation the way they need to. Now, what's interesting about that, where we can take this whole foundational thing and apply it to the actual GMAT, is on the GMAT itself, if you get easy questions wrong, and even easy to medium questions wrong, that's always going to be a scenario that affects your score negatively, right? And I'm sure you've heard that before. If you don't get every single hard question right, I would say it's not, I would not say that's the end of the world, but getting super easy questions wrong is. So this goes back to building your foundations. If your foundations aren't there, and for some reason you never practice easy to medium questions, well, let's say you get one on the GMAT and for whatever reason you're not comfortable with something even that basic, which may sound odd, but it can happen, that would be really bad for your score. So, it's all about pacing yourself and looking to climb that GMAT mountain and understanding that, okay, yeah, I'm going to take my time and I'm going to do this the right way. And going back to my original point of how to be studying, look, if you do it the wrong way and you say, okay, I want to get this done in 2 months, so forget about my foundations, forget about my gradual approach, forget about my topical approach to studying, I'm just going to get this done. Well, what happens is if after 2 months you do all of this practice, you put in all this time to kind of get through the process quicker, and you just don't even come close to getting your score goal, well, what happens then? Well, unfortunately, you're basically starting at the beginning. You got to go all the way back. You got to look at what you did wrong. You need to reassess, and then you're going to have to reformulate your strategy. And the problem is that you've then wasted 2 months of study time, whereas you'd be 2 months ahead, but now you're 2 months behind. So really consider how it is you're going to plan to study before you dive in. Have an organized process and really dive in. And if you can see in the comments, we have a TTP student here, which is super cool to hear. who started at a Quant 16 and Verbal 28. Wow, this is incredible. And he's now at a 48 and 36. And he's targeting a Verbal 42. And he's been at it for a long time and has put in the necessary hours. But again, like his starting score of Q16 and V28, it's a low score, but he was obviously motivated and is motivated, and you can see it's paid off. So that's a really cool story. Thank you for sharing that, about how he's kind of gotten ahead here. Now, another thing I want to talk about is, and this is for when you're a little bit further in the process, right? Embracing your weaknesses. Okay. So a lot of time, I mean, look, when you get to the GMAT, you're always going to have weak areas. That's a fact. Like no one is ever going to feel 100% comfortable with everything when they get to the GMAT. It's a fact. You're going to have stronger areas, you're going to have weaker areas. And yes, strategically use those to your advantage, obviously, when you are taking the GMAT. But what I'm getting at about embracing your weaknesses to eliminate them is within your studying, don't allow a preconceived notion of a weakness to affect how you're studying that topic. I've seen so many people be like, well, I can't do combination and permutation questions, so I'm just going to skip them, right? I don't need to know them. Well, the unfortunate is they could throw a 500 level, 600 level combination question at you. So if you do skip it and then you see it on the test, well, that's a low level question you're going to get wrong. So instead of shying away from that, harness what it is your weak areas are and try to fix them, because what's going to make you better is taking on the challenge of making your weak areas stronger. That's what's going to get you better. So rather than saying, yeah, I'm just going to skip combinations and permutations. Well, no, don't skip it. Dive into it. Really learn it and really immerse yourself in it. And just because you didn't know how to do it 2 or 3 years ago doesn't mean that you can't do it now. I mean, we had someone recently who was talking to me who's in our course, and she said that she had, barely ever had known how to do probability questions, but after doing our probability chapter, she learned it literally for the first time. So if she let her previous experience dictate how it was that she was going to study for the GMAT, well, then she would have just skipped probability altogether. But if you're looking for a great score or even a good score, you need to make sure that you're focused on turning those weaknesses into strengths. Because again, if you just skip things altogether, it could really bite you on test day. I mean, remember, there's only 31 questions on the quant section, and there's only 36 verbal questions. So the same goes for verbal. I've heard people say, well, I'm really bad at reading comprehension. So what happens if I just skip all those questions and do well on the others? And you can't do that. Again, if you feel you're not strong in something like reading comprehension, then you need to do what's necessary to get better at it. If you think, oh, I really stink at science passages, well, get a subscription to Scientific American, right? Start reading science magazines and get yourself into a place where A, you feel comfortable, and B, maybe you can feel interested in those passages, because that's another thing. You don't want to be in a place where you say, well, those are boring, so I'm not going to do well on them. Well, you can't say that, because what if you get 3 or 4 science passages? They're not necessarily going to all be to your liking, so you have to find a way to make yourself interested and effective, obviously, when reading through those things. So don't shy away from your weak areas. Make sure that you are really, really harnessing them and basically eliminating them and making them strengths. Another important component of just talking about GMAT Quant. So, a lot of times I'll talk to people about what their strengths and weaknesses are. Like, where are you struggling? And someone will say, oh, well, I'm struggling in algebra, for example. And the thing is algebra in itself, and to a certain point, algebraic translations too, are just a huge part of the GMAT. So to say that you're struggling in algebra, well, that means you're struggling with the entire test, right? because algebra is, yes, you have algebra questions like with quadratics and linear equations, but algebra shows up in rate questions. It shows up in work questions. It shows up in geometry. It shows up in ratios. It shows up in even some combinations and probability questions. You can have algebra. So the point is, it's everywhere. So you need to have your algebraic skills down, and you can't avoid building those skills. I'll have some people say, well, I don't really have to translate this into an equation because I can back solve just using the answer choices. And does back solving work in certain cases? Yeah, I suppose it works. But the thing is, does it work in data sufficiency? No, it does not work in data sufficiency because there are no answer choices to back solve with. So you have to be careful if you're using strategies that only work in certain situations, in certain questions. You never want to pigeonhole yourself to a place where you're doing something that isn't going to work in all cases and all places. So if we circle back to the whole thing about foundations, well, algebraic translations, being able to do algebra is a huge part of your foundation. And remember, a lot of this stuff can be put on flashcards and things like that, especially with translations. I talk to students all the time where they'll struggle with a particular translation, like, Jack has 10 times as many dimes as nickels, right? And in order to make that equation successfully, you have to say 10 times the number of nickels equals the number of dimes. But a lot of times people will do it as 10 times the number of dimes equals the number of nickels. The issue with that is it's backwards. When you know there's more dimes than nickels and you're equating something together, you have to multiply the smaller item to equal the larger item. It just doesn't seem right when you're doing it. But you can put this on a flashcard and you can memorize it. There's only so many ways they can say it. Because in another instance, they could say, Paul is 10 times as old as Frank. Well, in that case, it's the same thing. It's just ages instead of coins. And the more you can kind of get those down by looking at them and, having them on the tip of your brain, I think the better off you're going to be. So keep that in mind as well. Like, it's a huge part of GMAT Quant, but it's all learnable stuff. We teach it to a T in Target Test Prep. So, if you're using the course, I'm sure you're probably a pro at algebraic translations and algebra in general. All right, something else that's important to talk about is being comfortable, being uncomfortable. So that kind of goes back to understanding that when you're in the moment in practice. So there's two kind of components to this. There's the practice, and then there's also what happens on an actual GMAT. So I want to talk about both of those. When you're in practice and you get stuck on a question, or you get nervous on a question, or you make a mistake on a question, the thing I don't want you to do is give up and then immediately go look at the solution. Or need to train yourself to be in a position where when you are making a mistake or when you feel uncomfortable in a question, that you can take a deep breath and really think about what it is you need to do to arrive at a correct answer. And look, it may take you 5 minutes, it may take you 10 minutes, but if you can get to that answer, you're going to start training yourself to become accurate and be kind of malleable in the moment when you're dealing with GMAT questions. Because the last thing you want to do is train yourself to give up too easy on something and realize you could have gotten it right had you stuck with it a little bit longer. Now, yes, on the actual GMAT and on test day, you can't spend 10 minutes on a question. You likely can't even spend 5 minutes on a question. But in practice, you need to train yourself to be accurate. And then the whole timing thing, all of that will follow. But again, you have to be accurate, or everything else is moot. If you don't have accuracy, it doesn't matter how fast you are. As I always say, like getting to a wrong answer quickly is not helpful. So when you're practicing, give yourself over quote unquote 2 minutes to solve questions. Give yourself as much time as you need, and you'll be fine. You'll at least give yourself a shot of getting these questions correct. And look, if after 6 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever, you still don't have a correct answer, yeah, take a guess. That'll help building your skills on guessing when you need to, and then move on. But don't be in a position where you are just clicking and moving on because you're sick of a question. You want to make sure you're doing everything you can to get a question right. Now, bringing this into the scope of the GMAT, well, there's two important things to talk about. When it comes to timing and giving up on questions in the GMAT in real time, the thing you got to be very careful about is having what I call a quick trigger finger. What I mean by that is if you're so overwhelmed with time and thinking about time on GMAT, and every time you get to that 2-minute mark, let's say, you basically decide, you know what, I'm going to just move on. Even if you have a shot at a question, you'll find that your score is going to be affected pretty negatively because you're in a position where you're probably not giving yourself the time you need on particular questions, and you're forgetting the fact that not every question has to take you 2 minutes. A question can take you 30 seconds. A question could take you 10 seconds. And so everything should even out. And furthermore, if you know you have to catch up on time, in general, don't just go into a question and click an answer. I would say to organically catch up. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you get to a particular data sufficiency question, some of them can be answered quite quickly based on rules and strategies and understanding what's being tested. So you can't always assume like, hey, forevermore on this test, I'm going to have to spend 2 minutes plus on every question, so I'm not going to be able to catch up. You need to get to particular questions and say, all right, I'm 20 seconds in and I'm 70% certain that the answer is A in this DS question. I'm going to put A because I want to catch up on my timing and I want to do it correctly. And if you can do that, you'll find that you'll probably be more successful in the long run. If you're just clicking after 2 minutes, you would be shocked how many questions you give up on, and obviously what the issues are for trying to get your goal score. So you want to be really, really, really careful in having that quick trigger finger. Now, as far as being comfortable or uncomfortable on the test, you're in a position where things are going to go wrong on test day, right? So you have to be prepared for that. You are going to see a question that you think you should get right that you're not getting right. You are going to make, and we'll talk about this next, careless errors. You are going to feel like things are maybe harder than they are. As you do better on the test, certainly the questions are going to get harder. That's a loose idea of how the algorithm works. So you have to be prepared to be uncomfortable, but you can't let that affect your mental mindset or how you're feeling about the test in real time. So, hey, you get a question wrong and you know you got it wrong, move on. You've got, 18 questions left or whatever to make up for that. If the first question on the GMAT stumps you, which it does for many, don't spend 10 minutes on it because you need to get that first question right. Make a guess, move on, and live to fight, another day on the test. And then on the macro, let's say you take quant first, you think you didn't do well. Okay, think is the key word here because so many people think they don't do well when they actually do because you've seen harder stuff, as I just said. Don't allow that to carry over to the other sections of the GMAT. Don't go into the verbal section dejected because you think you messed up quant. Because what happens if you didn't mess up quant, right? And then you do bad on the verbal because of how you're thinking about these things. Well, that to me is like the worst way to get a bad score or not your target score because you could have done better on verbal, but your mind was out of it and you kind of had mentally given up before that section. So you just have to understand that test day is a day of ups and downs. It's not a day of all ups. It's not like this. You're going to get here and then you're going to go here and then you're going to bring yourself back up. But if your mindset is poor, what's going to happen is your day is going to be this. trust me, it doesn't take much to really get blown out from the GMAT if your mind is not there and your mindset is not there. So, going into test day, just understand that, and I think you're going to be in a really, really nice spot when it comes to your exam, at least from the mental side of things. Something I just mentioned earlier was careless mistakes. Those are things that are tough, and careless mistakes are the type of thing that you need to really train yourself to not do. Now, of course, it's easier said than done, but I think to be aware of what your careless mistakes are and how or why they're happening, right? Are you the type of person who, let's say in a data sufficiency question, you forget what the given information said, or are you not including the fact that the variables should be positive? If that is the case, then you have to make sure that you're not allowing yourself to do that. You have to be extra careful in DS questions. In problem solving questions, are you sometimes solving for the wrong variable? If the question asks you to solve for Padma's age, but you solve for Carlos's age, well, that's a problem, right? You need to always understand what it is you're solving for, regardless of what the first successful calculation is. The GMAT will definitely try to trap you there. Are you having issues with even reading your handwriting? Are you having issues because, on the dry erase booklet, if you're in the test center, are you using up too much space and then trying to make up to write in smaller spaces? Well, if that's the case, the simple solution, just go ahead and raise your hand and get another dry erase notebook from the proctor. Are you doing math in your head when you know you shouldn't be doing it? Even things such as simple addition, simple multiplication, are you doing things in your head that you shouldn't be doing, right? So, you need to make sure that you're not allowing those errors to happen. And again, when you look through a solution, if you divided instead of multiplied, like you need to say, all right, well, that's something I've done wrong, and I need to make sure I don't do it again. I mean, we had a student just today showed us a question thinking that it should have been 16 times 2, but it was really 16 divided by 2. And that's the definition of a careless error, right? Now, how do you fix careless errors? Well, you make sure that you're in the moment. You can't necessarily, in your practice, you can definitely slow down, that's for sure. On the GMAT, you don't necessarily have that luxury, but you need to be very micro-focused, and you need to be very micro-focused on this step and this calculation, and then you move to the next one, so on and so forth. If you're trying to do everything at once or one time, you're going to find that you make careless errors. If you are annoyed that the question previously was wrong, or that you got it wrong rather, and it's still in your head in the next question, you're probably apt to make careless errors. If you're mad that you didn't do well in the quant section or don't think you did well in the quant section, and then in the verbal section you're all upset, you're going to make careless errors. So these things carry over, and of course in your practice, you need to make sure that you are eliminating these careless errors. So as many of them as you can, you're not going to have them happen on test day. Remember, as they say, you need to practice like you play. Careless errors are something that is just part of the process, but I promise you, you can work on them, you can get better with them, and you can hopefully eliminate most of them on test day. But it does take, a while to get over them, but you can. So there is a question here from a current TTP student, and he is done with the course and reviewing and doing weaknesses. Well, I think the optimal way to go through the course is to build some custom tests and make sure that you do custom tests of multiple topics and you see where it is you're still weak or where there are knowledge gaps based on what you're getting right and wrong. Obviously, going through the practice test phase and doing all 6 MBA.com practice exams, doing our weaknesses tests. And if you want extra practice outside of that, you can look into using the OG. We have a really cool video on the course that shows how to incorporate the official guide into your studying. But other than that, I mean, that's it. Obviously, reviewing your notes, reviewing your flashcards, all of that stuff is really, really important. Um, so yeah, I would say for sure doing all that is going to be incredibly, incredibly helpful. Um, other things worth talking about. I mean, we kind of touched on these previously. Learning before you practice. Don't just going through practice questions on verbal and quant for that matter, and doing on-time practice. So again, you have to make sure you're learning and then you're practicing. If you just dive into your practice questions, then you're going to find that you struggle, and it's going to be a frustrating process. Remember, your GMAT prep is going to take probably over, it's going to happen over the course of months and not necessarily days or weeks. It's going to be months. And if the process isn't smooth and you don't feel good every time you sit down to study, you're going to get annoyed. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to lose interest in your studying. And, from there, you're going to lose motivation. And eventually, you're just going to stop your GMAT studying altogether. So it's key that you have a really sound process in place of how it is you're going to be studying. At TTP, we have a really cool study plan that people and students follow. It's cool because it does follow the methodology that I just discussed of learning before you practice, and it's laid out in a way that allows you to know what you need to do and in the order you need to do it, so you don't ever have to think about what it is you have to do before study, before or when you sit down to study, because that's half the battle too. You don't have a study plan. Every time you sit down to study, you have to spend extra time literally thinking about what it is you need to do to study. Another question, do we go to the OG after completing the course or in between? I would say if you want extra practice, do it after. There's a ton to do in TTP while you're in the thick of the learning phase, so you don't necessarily need to do it while you're in the course. And then the last thing too, and we can open up this to more question answer, your study materials. Like, you need to select great study materials, and probably just one set of study materials. The thing that sometimes people do, which I wouldn't recommend, is using multiple study materials at once. I mean, different study materials have different methodologies. Trying to combine them together is usually never going to work, because you're going to be getting pushed and pulled between various strategies. So be really careful of that. And if you're curious about study materials, well, you guys are all here on GMAT Club. They have great review section where you can look at the reviews from students and see which ones resonate with you. You can look at the Share Your GMAT Experience section to see what's worked for people. And then, most important of everything, is most courses should have some sort of trial. At Target Test Prep, what I love about ours, which is different from most, is we actually have a full access trial. It's $1, but it's full access, and you get 5 days with it, and you can really dig yourself in and say, okay, how would it look moving forward if I were to use TTP? Because it's not a watered down version of the course. It is the course, and you can get a real feel for how you think it could work for you. So that's really, the best way to get yourself familiarized with what course you want to use for your prep. You have to try them out for yourself after looking through, reviews that you think are relevant to you. And just to go through some of the reviews here from TTP. I mean, you can see we've had some really cool experiences. Some of these people have been interviewed actually on YouTube Live here at GMAT Club. Obviously, most of you, well, maybe it's not obvious, but a lot of you probably know about Dalal. She went from a 250 to a 780, just a ridiculously large score increase. It took her a long time. I mean, this is over the course of years, but she did it. I mean, that's the important thing. We see another 770 here with TJ. Joseph got a 770 and a verbal 51, which is great. Someone in the chat, actually one of our students, mentioned our verbal course, which a lot of people know us for quant because over the years prior to launching verbal, we were quant only, but we have an amazing verbal course which matches our quant course. So essentially, we have a full GMAT course now. So this isn't 3 years ago where we just had quant. We have everything you need to succeed on the GMAT. Someone just asked, as a working professional, how can I plan to start my prep from scratch? Well, as a working professional in general, you need to make sure that that you kind of harness a schedule that's going to work for you and allow you to study. So hopefully you can fit in about 18 hours a week of studying. That would be a good start. As far as how to start your preparation, you could familiarize yourself with the GMAT a little bit. For example, if you tried our trial to target test prep, the first few chapters are intro chapters. You could read those chapters, then take a full-length MBA.com practice exam, get a baseline score, and then you could put yourself in a position where you then can say, okay, I'm X points away from my target score. So in my estimation, this is how long it's going to take me to study. And then it's the same stuff I said, picking out the right study materials, and then developing your study plan. And if you get the right study materials, they will have a study plan for you and ready for you, just as I said we do at Target Test Prep. Another question, do you have all sections on verbal? We do. We have sentence correction, we have critical reasoning, and we have reading comprehension. So yes, we have every section on GMAT verbal. All right, and here's just a few other testimonials. Another 770 with a Q50. Excuse me. No, this one was the Q51. And then Matthew and Peter also scored 770. So we definitely have a lot of students hitting those high level scores. But like I said, the things that I said today aren't just about getting 770. They're about getting a 720 or a 690 or a 650. I mean, it's all relatable to what it is you need. These are best practices for studying in general to maximize your GMAT score. Does TTP teach via videos through reading materials? We have videos and we have reading. So the course is written, but we have video solutions in our chapter examples, which is really cool. The reason we love our written course is because it gives you a lot more freedom and flexibility when you're going through the course. If you're someone who understands a particular topic, you have the ability to skim through something and move to the example question. So you're not kind of tied down to having to watch or slog through a video of something you already understand. And the thing with writing, of course, is you can be more detailed than you can in a given video. So yeah, the written nature of the course is really, really great. And then, as I said, we also have video solutions. So, you can see from our perspective how it is we're solving quant and verbal questions. So it really is the best of both worlds. The ones in the chapter tests, on the easy side should be fine. If you find that you're struggling with them, just as we talked about earlier, make sure you're doing untimed practice and you're not focused on the clock when you're answering them. And of course, reach out to us, if you have any questions or need help. We're always happy to chat. You can reach out to Marty too for verbal stuff, and he can help you out for sure. So you're using TTP from September. Yeah, we do have more quant questions than verbal, but our verbal questions are, I think we have the most verbal questions of any other GMAT course that I'm aware of, and we have more questions on verbal than the entire official guide. So, you can't compare the number of verbal questions we have to quant. You need to compare the number of verbal questions we have to where else you would find and use and get verbal questions. So if you look at it through that lens, we actually have a ton of verbal questions. They're just not as plentiful or bountiful as what we have in GMAT Quant for Target Test Prep. Again, these are just some more students, as you can see. Really cool score increases from these students. Like I said, we have a lot of students who have scored in the mid to high 700s. We've had students who scored across the board. I mean, remember, it's not just a course where you only need it to get high scores, but you certainly can. We've developed the course so that we have various study tracks that have less or more content depending on your score goal that you select. And based on that, we're giving you the content that we think you need to get to your score goal. So it's it makes it so that it's accessible to any student, looking for any score. And as you can see, here is our, basically our score increases. These are based on our GMAT club reviews. We have a 157-point score increase. Average quant is 48, average verbal is 41, and over, 84% of our students have scored 700 or higher. So fact is, if you can finish our course and complete our course, there's absolutely no reason why you can't get your target GMAT score. But yes, as we said, you just have to be willing to work at your GMAT to get to that place. These types of things do not happen overnight. And we do have a great score guarantee. It's a 110-point score guarantee. If you're starting at a 560, between 560, you can get, we guarantee 110 points, and then it scales down as you move up. We've actually recently adjusted the score guarantee. So basically, if you're starting at a 570, you get 70 points. But starting at a 640, we're now giving basically a 70-point score guarantee. 650 is 60 points. 670 is 40 points, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, we're for certain scores where you're at a 640 or higher, we're essentially guaranteeing that you're going to get a 710. Now, that means that you need to complete the whole course to be eligible for the guarantee, but it's a great guarantee, and most people who take TTP do complete the entire course. The number of hours to complete quant and verbal on TTP, honestly, it's dependent on the student. If you're starting at a 420 and want a 750, I'd give you a much different estimation than if you're at a 640 and want a 710. So it really just depends. What we always tell people is, look, dive into the course, track your timing, see how long things are taking you. Also understanding that, you're going to be in a position where you're going to get better and faster as you move through the course. And then from there, you can kind of, forecast how long it'll take you to move through it. Now, I recommend about 18 hours a week of studying. That's a good floor. If you can do more, that's great. Try to stick to that floor of 18. And if you can do that, you should be able to efficiently work yourself through the course. I mentioned this before, but we offer a trial, so you guys can do the trial for sure if you're interested in checking out TTP based on some of the things I discussed here today. It's $1. It's 5 days. It will expire after 5 days, so you won't be automatically billed. Some people ask that question a lot. There's no automatic upgrade or anything like that. The upgrade is based on you choosing to do the upgrade yourself. Do you guys have any other questions about your GMAT, about target test prep, anything that strike your interest based on some of the things we've been discussing today here? Any questions at all? No, once you take the trial, you cannot take a second trial. We just allow one per student. Well, the course is written in text and we have video solutions. So I can't, it's not really an apples to apples comparison. But as I said, I prefer the text over the videos because it allows you more flexibility when you're actually learning the material. Any other questions? Okay, looks like we have our bases covered here. So, yeah, we can wrap up here, but thanks again, everybody, for attending today. Hopefully you learned a thing or two about the GMAT, and you can take some of the things we mentioned and harness them and use them in your own preparation. If anyone needs anything, you can always reach out to me or the team directly about TTP or your GMAT. I see we have one more question. IQ and GMAT score. If you're questioning your abilities, well, I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're wondering how you deal with questioning whether you're kind of worthy or able to score high on the test. I will tell you that it's not a situation where you have to have a crazy high IQ score to get a great GMAT score, and you can't really think that way. So, as I showed you guys earlier with Dalal's case, she went from a 280 to a 7, I think it was 250 to 780, around there. Now, if she at that point had questioned her ability to do well in the GMAT, well, she would have given up, right? So you can't look at it and say, well, the person sitting to the left of me is smarter or has a higher IQ score, and same with the person sitting to the right of me. So how am I ever going to, learn this exam? Fact is, it is all learnable. If you follow the things that I mentioned here today and how to create your study routine and how to follow an effective study routine, you can learn it. So don't ever doubt yourself. Don't ever question yourself. This is a personal journey. It may take you 8 months, and it may take someone else 6, and it may take someone else 12. So don't put yourself in a situation where you're comparing yourself to others. Know that it's a learnable test, and you can do as well as you need to. You purchased the GMAT. I think you mean you purchased the trial, and yes, you can upgrade to the 4-month plan. My test is December 29th, and you won't have enough time to do all the hard tests. Goal is 600. Yeah, I mean, I don't think if your goal is 600, you certainly don't have to do all the hard tests. I would say try to get in as much easy and medium tests as you can while following the study plan. Your average time is around 3 minutes. I mean, honestly, if you're including hard questions in that average time, I don't think that 3 minutes is that poor. I have a feeling that when you actually get to a practice exam or the real test, that accuracy, or excuse me, that timing is going to reduce downward closer to the 2-minute range. So I don't think 3 minutes is anything to be super concerned about. I think if you look at how you do on hard questions versus medium or easy, I bet you that average time, reduces pretty easily. Any other questions? Okay. Well, if that is it, everybody, we can. Oh, if you were to realistically estimate the total hours, if you're at a Q29 V32, assuming you have to score really, really high, to get a 780, I would say 500 or more hours. Yeah, you're asking for a pretty major increase. I'd say at least 500 hours, not more. Okay, very good. So we can wrap up here. Thank you guys for attending. Thank you for asking such great questions. Thank you for participating. I will be back at some point to do another YouTube live session. So have a wonderful rest of your week. I guess the week is about over. So rest of your weekend. We will all talk soon. So thanks again, everybody. Talk to you later.